Hi, everyone, and welcome to Night School. I'm Lynn from the Nightlife Programming team.
And I'm Christina, the event producer.
Every week, we're bringing nightlife programming to you at home with virtual nightlife and Night School. We're back again tonight with Night School. If it's your first time tuning in, welcome. For those who have joined us before, welcome back. So glad to have you all with us tonight. Tonight's Night School is a guide to celestial wayfinding.
And we're very excited to have guests here from Hawaii's Imiloa Astronomy Center. Kālepa Baybayan, Navigator in Residence, is here to tell you stories of decades of voyaging on Hawaii's iconic traditional deep-sea canoes and to talk about oceanic history and the Indigenous system of navigation. And then Emily Peavy, who's the center's astronomy educator, is here to give you an introduction to the tropical night sky.
As a reminder, tonight's program is live, so please feel free to ask questions and share comments in the chat. Kālepa and Emily will do a Q&A after their talks. That's all for us. Enjoy.
Hi, good evening. My name is Kālepa Baybayan, and I'm joined by Emily Peavy, and tonight's presentation is entitled Lani Ko Luna, Sky Above. In losing the sight of land, you discover the stars. Next slide. Both Emily and myself, we work for the Imiloa Astronomy Center of Hawaiʻi. It's a cultural and astronomy center located on the campus of the University of Hawaiʻi at Hilo. Next slide. Tonight we're going to share a story about the oceanic history of how the many islands of the Pacific came to be settled. I'm basically a storyteller, and so I'm just going to take you through, as I understand it, the very layman-like history of how the many islands of Oceania came to be settled. Before oceanic settlement can be described, I think we need to take a look at the whole landscape of human migrations. And so, next slide. And so we begin back when Homo sapiens, our ancestor species, appeared on this planet. Next slide. We appeared on this planet some 200,000 years ago in Kenya and Ethiopia in East Africa. 10,000 years into our history, about 190,000 years ago, there is a large ice age that besets the many land masses of the planet, and so that forces Homo sapien tribes to start to migrate to warmer climates, and they walk all the way from Ethiopia to the very edge of the South African continent. Next slide. Down on the very, very tip of the South African continent, where they could go no further south. Here in this area called Mussel Bay, our early Homo sapien ancestors lived for some 80,000 years. And along this coastline, next slide, and in caves along this coastline, they developed all the human qualities we know today as being Homo sapien. Next slide. So here we are, first humans to inhabit the very fringes of the South African continent. And here we begin to develop all the qualities we know as typically human. We develop language, we develop artwork and body ornamentation. We develop very, very finely tipped shows, really finely tight stone tools. And as we're growing both biologically and cognitively, we are feeding our bodies a diet that is high in omega-3 enzymes, basically from seafood and shellfish. Next slide. And here along the coastline, we begin to harvest shellfish. We fish and we eat the remains of carcasses of whales. And what that does is seafood has a high omega-3 content, and that's like brain fertilizer. And so as we're developing cognitively, right, we Homo sapiens, the one distinct biological difference between us and other hominid species is our brain capacity. We have the largest brains of all these species, and so we're feeding it this high fertilizer, high nutrient diet. And next slide. And we're learning here along the coastline, humans become aquatic. We learn how to swim, and we learn how to explore the shorelines and coastlines of South Africa. Next slide. And then as the earth warms, we begin our migration north, right? Walking over mountain ridges and along rivers. We eventually get into Central Europe, and we're finding that there are other hominid species that have settled before us, like Neanderthals in Europe, and Homo erectus and Homo Denisovians in Asia, and Homo florensis in the beltway that joins Southeast Asia and Australia. And then next slide. And then about 50,000 years ago, we Homo sapiens, a pedestrian species, get to the very edge of Southeast Asia. And then we cross a series of waterways. The widest would have been about 40 nautical miles. You can see 40 nautical miles ahead. You don't really need any kind of sophisticated navigation system to cross a 40-mile span of water. And you can create a sea craft simply by tying logs together. And basically, we float our ways into Australia. These two continents, Sunda here in Southeast Asia and Sahul here, which houses Australia, are these two subcontinents. And again, these waterways are very narrow because of because there's another ice age that's to beset the Earth. And then about 10,000 years ago, next slide, the Earth warms, and then all those narrow ocean passages become filled with water, and these pedestrians that have walked into Southeast Asia, they're basically landlocked. They cannot get back across those straits because they don't have seafaring technology. And about 10,000 years ago, when the Earth warms, people living on the shores of South China begin to migrate to island Taiwan. And then 5,000 years ago, a new culture arrives, and this is a culture, next slide, that brings forth the voyaging sea craft that enable all of Oceania to be settled, right? These are highly sophisticated craft. They start to toy with the idea of how they can navigate these canoes out on the ocean. They start to develop the rudiments of sophisticated navigation system. Next slide. But the sequence of early settlement of Oceania is that about 3,000 BC, they begin to explore south, and they enter the Philippine Islands in about 1500 BC. At about 1300 BC, they are arriving here in Micronesia and Fiji, Tonga, and Samoa. And then only in the last 1500 years do they get and push further east into the Central Polynesia, which is the islands of Tahiti and the Cook Islands and the Marquesas. And finally, they end up settling Hawaii. Hawaii was settled only recently. By about 1,000 years ago, they arrived in Hawaii. About 900 years ago, they arrived in Easter Island. And about 800 years ago, they arrived in New Zealand. Next slide. Okay. But their range is great, right? Their range is great. The Pacific and the Indian Ocean, the island of Madagascar, they have settled areas that expand from Madagascar all the way to the coast of South America. which is 2,300 kilometers, we know definitively that they got to South America because of the sweet potato cultigen. The sweet potato, which you find all through the Pacific, is a South American cultigen. So people must have sailed to South America, got the sweet potato, and re-exported it back into the Pacific. Okay, but people from Southeast Asia also get to the island of Madagascar, which is only a few hundred miles off of the coast of Africa. Madagascar was never settled by Africans. It was settled by Southeast Asian oceanic peoples. Next slide. Okay. We know the exact trail that they migrated on because of the kind of pottery they took with us, because pottery breaks. And so this type of pottery called lapita is very distinctive. It's dentate stamped. It's very easy to identify. And so they find a trail of lapita pottery from Southeast Asia leading into the Pacific. Next slide. Also, archaeology, it was a strong indicator of the connections between the many islands of Polynesia. This is a simple stone adze called C7727. It comes from a collection of 17 stone adzes that researchers studied that were taken from coral atolls. Stone adzes are made out of basalt, right? Coral atolls are made out of coral. And so they took these 17 stone adzes and they performed intrusive research typing called plasma mass spectrometry, by which they take a sliver of the stone and they melt it down into its plasmatic state. And once they get it down in its plasmatic state, they can identify its chemical and mineralogical signature. And then they can type it to the exact lava flow. So this stone adze, next slide, came from this little island way down here in the south, but it began its journey here in Hawaii in Kaho'olawe, and on the island of Kaho'olawe, and someone transported it 4,300 kilometers to the small atoll. Next slide. Right, we know the exact spot that the coral, the basalt stone adze came from because of the mineral typology. It came from a point of land called Ke'ala Kahiki, means a road to foreign lands. There's an ad scory here that stone was collected from. And that, next slide, and that stone adze was taken by canoe 4,300 kilometers away to this tiny atoll called Napuka. Next slide. In the 1970s, we wanted to continue to learn how our ancestors could have built canoes and sailed these canoes. And most of all we wanted to learn was how did they navigate these canoes. And so in the 1970s, the Polynesian Voyaging Society was formed. And what they proposed to do was an exercise in experimental archaeology, by which they would recreate an artifact. This artifact would be a sailing canoe. And so they built the twin-masted sailing canoe, Hōkūle'a, in the 1970s. Next slide. And then they went searching for a navigator. They found a navigator on a tiny island of Sarawal in Micronesia. His name was Mau Piailag. And then they requested Mau come to Hawaii and navigate the canoe. And so he agreed to do that. So in 1976, next slide. 1976, this traditional navigator from the island of Sarawal comes to Hawaii, next slide, and navigates Hōkūle'a. Took them 33 days to arrive in Tahiti. And a trip was a success in terms of its scientific mission, but in terms of its human mission, in terms of the social experiment of many crew members living on a very small spaced voyaging canoe, it didn't succeed. Okay, next slide. So after the canoe arrives in Tahiti, Mao is supposed to navigate the canoe back to Hawaii for the conclusion of the trip, but he decides to depart the trip. And so they navigate Hōkūle'a back to Hawaii using a sextant and instruments. Okay. And then in the 70s, after Mao's departure, a young Hawaiian man young Hawaiian man standing on the left, his name is Nainoa Thompson. He starts to re-engineer the art of non-instrument navigation. He does that by using academics and developing a course of study at the University of Hawaiʻi. He takes meteorology and oceanography and astronomy, and he starts to develop this science. And what he proposes to do is in 1980 is to sail Hōkūle'a with his re-engineered system of navigation. And so right before the trip, about a year before the trip, he has serious spiritual problems about the issue of navigating the canoe. And he talks with his father, and his father tells him, well, there's only one resolution. What it sounds like is you need to go find Mao, bring back Mao to Hawaii to help him round out your training. So Nainoa goes on his expedition, and he finds Mao on the tiny island of Saipan, and he invites Mao back to Hawaii to round out his training. Mao agrees. He shows up in Hawaii, and they work together. What's amazing is when Mao and Nainoa compare their systems, that is Nainoa's re-engineered system and Mao's traditional wayfinding system, they are exactly alike. Next slide. So there's three skills you needed to wayfind. One is you need a device to orientate the canoe, basically a compass. Next, you need to locate the vessel on the ocean, and we do that by process of dead reckoning or measuring the altitudes of particular stars. And lastly, and most importantly, is you need to find land. You need a safe arrival, and that technique is called expanded landfall. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the star compass is based upon the circle of the horizon. The circle on the edge represents the horizon. There are 32 stones placed in a circle, right? There's one stone for north, one stone for south, and there are 15 stones representing the eastern horizon and 15 stones representing the setting horizon. Stars move from one horizon across the compass and exit the opposite side. Wind and waves move through the compass from quadrant to quadrant. So let's go to the next slide. Right. So here we have the direction east, which we call Hikina, and here we have the direction west, which we call Komohana. Next slide. This is a tropical device. I have to share that this compass device was developed specifically for the tropics. Next slide. Okay. Stars rise and move parallel from one horizon to the next, right? If a star rises east, it sets west, right? Each one of these squares is called a house. If a star rises 2 houses east, it's going to set 2 houses west in a parallel track. Next. However, the wind and the waves move across the compass from quadrant to quadrant. Okay. So anything you can visually see, you can use as a clue for determining direction. Next slide. Okay. Again, our compass is visual. Yeah. It also it's based upon feeling and internalizing the movement of the canoe. There's a certain beat and rhythm that the canoe makes as you're sailing on the ocean on an extended course. You internalize the motion. If that motion changes, if the pulse changes, then two things have either happened. Either the environmental conditions have changed or you've gone off course, and more likely you've gone off course. Okay, right? And then you need to fix position. We fix position by watching the bubbles and measuring speed as these bubbles float by the canoe. We have an algebraic formula that we perform to measure the speed of the canoe. And lastly, next slide. The stars will tell you when you're getting close to land, but the birds are really the greatest clue for leading you into landfall. Once you see these white, they're called terns. They're either white or black or gray. Once you see them, you're probably within 48 hours of finding land. Next slide. So what I'd like to share next is in 2014, we took a trip around the world in which we sailed Hōkūle'a. And there were three objectives. One was to become advocates for the world's oceans. The world's oceans is the largest single geographic feature on the planet. It takes up 70% of all geographic space. We wanted to learn about the oceans. Secondly, we wanted to launch an education campaign. And the education campaign would work with different NGOs and record the good work they were doing, and then we would post it on our website. And lastly, whenever we had an opportunity to engage with the indigenous communities of an area, of a particular area, we would do so, because the indigenous people represent the oldest culture of the land. Next slide, and the video.
Seven 7,000 years ago, the first really oceanic people came out of China, and it came out of Taiwan. Then you get to Polynesia, this oceanic country bounded by Hawaii in the north and New Zealand in the southwest, and Rapa Nui in the east. 10 million square miles, bigger than Russia. And it was discovered by these extraordinary people. They were really the astronauts of our ancestors. They were the greatest explorers on the face of the earth.
You know, our ancestors not were only just great navigators, they're great stewards of these islands. The time that the first Europeans came, the journals of Captain Cook talked about, you know, large populations, maybe 800,000. That's the median. It could be even higher. It's approaching maybe the numbers of people that are living on Hawaii today. They figured it out, how to live well on these islands, and I think that is the challenge of the time for planet Earth and all of humanity. It's to figure that out. How are you going to do that? Hōkūle'a is pulling us into a direction of asking the question, are you going to be responsible and are you going to take action? Are you going to do something with what you have? You got a voyaging canoe. Hōkūle'a, to us, to go around the world, has this enormous potential to go to 40, 50 countries on the planet, to be with the great navigators on Earth. And I'm not talking about those in canoes. I'm talking about those who are doing things to give kindness and compassion to the Earth and those who live on it. Those navigators. We're not going to change the world, but we're going to go and build a network of people around the Earth who are going to change it. And our job is to help them be successful. We're going to go around the world, and I'm willing to take the risk to do it, because the greater risk is to not act. The greater risk is to be apathetic. The greater risk is to remain ignorant, and the greater risk is not to take action.
In 3 years, Hōkūle'a traveled more than 40,000 nautical miles, stopping at over 100 ports of call across 27 nations. Her crews connected with some of the world's greatest influencers and engaged with those creating innovative solutions to protect our island Earth.
In my humble opinion, the success of the worldwide voyage was really building relationships from strangers from around the world. I watched our crew members. Every single place we went to, everybody that they met was treated with respect and with decency. That was the key and the core to the success of the voyage. That is why we have strangers turn into relationships, and relationships are now coming together as a movement around the same thing, caring values. Mālama honua.
Hōkūle'a returned safely to Hawaii, welcomed by a network of people from around the world who have been inspired by her voyage.
Hōkūle'a.
What I'm really thinking about more and more now, I'm just imagining, just imagine where Hawaii is going to be in 20 years. I mean, all these kids coming up, they're just going to be extraordinary leaders. What we need to do is stay on course, keep going, move inspiration into action, and really help move the movement of kindness around the earth so that it starts to have real impact. And you need to do that through your core relationship and build others. And get malama honua off the canoe into the communities. People need to know about what people are doing in classrooms, in our universities, in their backyards, in a coral reef, in the watershed, in our lo'i, in our fish ponds. I mean, we need to just capture the stories. It's going to start to celebrate all these people that people don't know. This is the canoe, and it's our communities are the navigators. I think we're on course, but the voyage ain't over. It's that simple.
Well, thank you. Now I'd like to introduce our planetarium specialist, Emily Peavy, who will do a little short segment on the tropical night sky. Take it away.
Aloha, everybody. One second, I'm going to make sure my Bluetooth is going to be working. So it's so wonderful to be here and to be talking with all of you today about this type of navigation. And one thing that I really want to emphasize about this is that all of this navigation, everything that Kālepa and I are talking to you, or all the specific techniques that we can teach you and talk to you about today, is fairly new. And today, with our little planetarium here, I'm going to be introducing you to the navigational compass. And this is knowledge that is 30 years old. This is not ancient knowledge that was passed down through many people. This is knowledge that was built and developed over the course of the past 30, 40 years. And this is it's modern and it's active and it's science, and that is what we're going to be doing today. So anyway, what you're seeing in front of you, the square in the front, that is going to be our planetarium. And this is where it's hard to get the planetarium onto our little computer, so you really need to be picturing that this thing is completely surrounding you. And we're going to be introducing ourselves to the nighttime sky and also to the navigational compass. And I have it set probably for the latitude of a good portion of you, the latitude of Cal Academy and areas around California. We're at 37.46 degrees north latitude. Oh, sorry, 36 degrees and 46 arc seconds. So this is the setting at sunset. And you can see here on sunset tonight where the sun is in the sky in our planetarium. And one of the essential pieces of being a navigator is taking one data point and being able to completely build something off of that one data point in order to precisely determine which direction you are facing. So right now, one of the easiest stars for us to see is, of course, the sun. And I told you that you are looking at the sky at sunset. So looking at where the sun is in the sky, can you determine which direction the sun is in the sky? If the sun is setting, is it going to be more towards the east, or is it going to be more towards the west? When does a star, I'm also going to read your questions to go, when does a star rise, at night, or actually when the sun can't be seen until dark? So stars are in the sky right now, even though the sun is up. It's just we can't see them because the sun is putting so much light in our atmosphere that the light is blocking out. But right now, looking at this, yes, the sun is going to be setting in the west. Now, does the sun always set exactly in the west? The answer is no. The sun rises in the east, sets in the west, but the sun will only rise exactly east and set exactly west twice a year, on the spring equinox and on the fall equinox. So we know that we're not on the fall equinox because that's in September. So we are in the summer season. So is the sun going to be setting south of west, exactly west, or north of west? Because we know that we, in the northern hemisphere, I'm sorry if anyone's speaking south, we're in the summer season. In the northern hemisphere, is the sun setting north of west, exactly west, or south of west? Well, let's see. Let's put on our exact tick marks for our directions. And there's my cardinal directions, and you can just see, and you can see the sun is definitely not setting exactly west. The sun is setting a good deal north of west because we are still in our northern summer season. So as a navigator, just with knowledge that you already have by watching one thing, you see the sun setting in the sky, you know what time of the year it is, and you know exactly where that sun is going to be setting in relation to west. And if you're a navigator, you're training for this, and you know this with a lot of perception. Firing up Stellarium, excellent work, and trying to use your tools. But the essential part about being a navigator is being able to do this without some of our tools that we would have. So we find where the sun is setting, and from that measurement, we can pinpoint exactly where west is. And here we're going to know west as Kumuhana. The western half of the sky is Kumuhana. That is the act of entering, as this is where our celestial objects will be entering our horizon. This is where they are leaving the sky. So now that we have used one observation to find one point in our sky, we get to do everybody's favorite thing. We get to do math. Yay, math. So we have a 360-degree sky. And as we have found the sun setting and we have found Kumuhana, we are going to face the direction of Kumuhana, of exact west. And we're going to do math by using our bodies. We're going to wrap our hands around the direction of west. And then you're going to move your left hand, which is called hema, over your left shoulder, creating a 90-degree angle. And when you do that, your left hand will land in the direction of south, or hema. So the name hema means both left and south, as your left hand is called hema, south is called hema. And now we're going to do the same thing with our right hand, which is called a cow. We're going to move it over our right shoulder, making another 90-degree angle. And then we're going to find the direction of north, or a cow. So a cow means both north and right. So if we did that, and if you go 180 degrees away from Kumuhana, then you're going to find the direction of Hikina, or the east. Hikina is the act of arriving, as this is where celestial objects will be arriving in our sky. So I'm going to get to the question about the Big Dipper in a minute. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So we have taken a 360-degree sky, and we have now divided it up into 4 pieces. What is 360 divided by 4? Answer is 90. So we've taken a 360-degree circle, broken it up into 4 pieces, and we now have a 360-degree sky divided into 4. We have 4 quadrants, each of 90 degrees. And so we call these areas quadrants. And these quadrants have names that'll help people track wind patterns as well as swells of the ocean. During Kālepa's portion, I saw in the comments there's people talking about ocean currents and swells. That knowledge is built into the navigational compass that our navigators are using when they're stretching out. Demonstrating the arms you face west, go one that way, and one that way. I apologize if not everyone is seeing all the comments, but I'd like being interactive a little bit. So our quadrants are going to be describing wind patterns as well as the swells of the ocean, and they have their own unique names. In the northeast, we have Ko'olau. To the southeast, we have Malanai. To the southwest, we have Kona. And in the northwest, we have ʻUla. So now we've taken our, based off of one observation of one celestial object interacting with our horizon, we've been able to take our 360-degree sky, find the 4 main cardinal directions, and break that sky up into 4 pieces, which is an excellent, great first step. But to get a little bit more precision in our navigation, we're going to have to break up our horizon into some smaller pieces. And Kālepa mentioned this earlier on. We're going to break up our compass, our horizon, into 32 pieces. Now, what is 360 divided by 32? That's a bit of a tougher one, and I don't blame you guys if you had to go out and get your calculator. You wanted to make it easier on yourself. What if I had said 360 divided by 36? It'd be 10. Well, 360 by 32 is a little bit more than 10. The answer is 11.25. We're going to have 11.25, we're going to have little components called hales, or houses, of 11.25 degrees breaking up the rest of our horizon. I'll put those on. Yep, 11.25. And we're going to let the sun set a little bit more just so it's become a little bit easier to see. So to become a navigator, you would need to know these hales. You would have to be able to memorize this compass and be able to place this compass along your horizon when you're out observing the sky. So you need to memorize all 32 of these houses before you step out onto the ocean. So thankfully for us, we already have 4 of the names of our 32 houses, which are our 4 main cardinal directions, Kumu, Kana, Hikina, Hema, and Kau. So now we only need to memorize 28 more names. Are you guys ready to memorize these 28 names? Here we go. So repeat after me. We have La, Aina, Noyo, Manu, Nalani, Naleo, and Haka. Whew. We just said 28 names. But did it feel like you guys just said 28 names? Probably not. We'll take a look at our compass and see what you notice about our compass and about how the names of our quadrants are set up along the compass. You'll notice that our compass is symmetrical. 7 times 4, 28. So you'll see that each of our quadrants that we've matched out has a La, Aina, Noyo, Manu, Nalani, Naleo, and a Haka. Our compass repeats itself, and it's very symmetrical. And this is going to reflect how stars will be rising and setting along our compass through the nighttime sky. A star is going to rise in one house in the Hikina half of the sky, and then it will set in that same house in the Komohana half of the sky. And we'll explore that a little bit more later on. My favorite expression of that fact is, actually, I'll save that story for a little bit later on. Let's get a little bit into our nighttime sky. And someone brought up the Big Dipper and finding the North Star for navigation. And that the Big Dipper and the North Star is a really excellent tool for navigation if you're in the Northern Hemisphere. And we'll explore that a little bit more with this. Right now, we're looking at the sky at about 9 o'clock at night in the San Francisco area, and we'll be able to find the Big Dipper. We also know the Big Dipper here in Hawaii as Nahiku, which means the 7. We'll put Nahiku in the sky. You can see made up of 7 stars, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, Big Dipper is cool. Now, if you take the first 2 stars in the front scoop of the Dipper and you use them to draw a straight line, that's going to point you to the North Star, Polaris. And here in Hawaii, we also know it as Hokupa'a. The word Hoku means star. Oh, yes, we can do it. So the word Hoku means star. So when we're talking here, you're probably going to hear me say the word Hoku all the time. So Hoku just means star. Pa'a means fixed or stuck, like you're stuck in the mud. So Hokupa'a is the fixed star or the stuck star because it appears to remain in the exact same position of the sky while all of the rest of our stars will appear to be slowly moving around it throughout the night. Now, one of the reasons why Hokupa'a and the Big Dipper are very, very useful when you're in the northern latitudes is because the North Star, when you're in the northern hemisphere, will always be in the sky, no matter where you are. No matter what time of year it is, no matter what time of night it is, if you're in the northern hemisphere, it will always be in your sky. And the North Star will always be as far above your northern horizon as you are north of the equator on the Earth. So in San Francisco, you guys are about 37 degrees north of the equator. And you can see here, I know it's a bit fainter on the screen, you can see that the North Star is about 37 degrees above the horizon. Now, the issue with the Big Dipper when you get to lower latitudes is the North Star is going to be getting closer to your horizon. And if you're on the equator, then the North Star is exactly on your horizon in the north. And if you go south of the equator, the North Star is then dropping below your horizon. So to demonstrate that, we're going to travel to where I am here in Hawaii, just outside of Hilo, which is 19 degrees north with 42 arc seconds. So now we're going to head north, and you can see how our sky is changing. Excuse me, we're heading south. You'll see how the sky is changing. And you'll notice here in Hawaii at 9 o'clock tonight, the North Star is much closer to our horizon. The Big Dipper is also much closer to the horizon. And if I speed time forward, you'll notice that over the course of the night, the Big Dipper is going to disappear. And so we cannot afford to be dependent on that one shape and on that one star in our sky. So as navigators, we'll look to the sky, and they're going to connect the sky into many different unique shapes in order to help them track the different stars throughout the night as the sky is changing throughout the night. And I think we have just a few more minutes, so I'll just introduce a navigational star line that is very prominent in our summer skies, both for everyone there in California and for us here in Hawaii. And this star line is particularly famous after a recent Disney movie. Oh, yes, that is the Milky Way that is cutting across the screen. And sitting right on top of the Milky Way is going to be the navigational star line of Lanai, or Maui's fishhook. So if anyone is familiar with the movie Moana, the shape of the fishhook was featured in the movie Moana. It is also the shape that, if we're familiar with Western star lore, it's the same shape that you would see as Scorpius the scorpion. But here it is the great fishhook of the demigod Maui. Sitting next to the fishhook is a mischievous little ʻUla fish that is trying to swim away from the fishhook, and that connects up to the summer triangle, which is here seen as the navigator's triangle. And in the video, and Kālepa's talk, Kālepa had mentioned the Polynesian triangle that stretches across the ocean from Rapa Nui to Aotearoa to Hawaii, or so Easter Island to New Zealand to Hawaii. And the navigator's triangle in our nighttime sky symbolizes that triangle that stretches across the ocean. So it's almost like a giant map high up in the middle of our nighttime sky. This is one of 4 of our navigational star lines. Now, while in Western culture there are 88 smaller constellations that are stretching across areas of the sky, and there's smaller little portions on the sky, here we're focused more on these enormous navigational star lines that are stretching across great areas across the sky. And you use these in order to help track your way across the ocean and be able to track how stars are rising and setting. And you do that by watching how these stars are interacting with our navigational compass. And just with the last couple minutes that I have, I'm going to zoom time forward into our early morning, and I'm going to point out a star that is just now rising in the east. This rose up just before 3 o'clock in the morning here in Hawaii. And here you see rising in Hikina is the famous shape of Orion the Hunter, which we know as Kahei Ona Akeki. And there's one star just on the corner of Orion's belt. And that star just on the corner of Orion's belt sits on top of a very special line in our sky, which is called the celestial equator. And because it is sitting on top of this special line in the sky, that star, it will always rise exactly in the east, and then it's going to set exactly in the west. So if you are out in the middle of the ocean and you see that star rise, and you can trace where that star rose from, you can see, you know exactly where east is. Now, if you know exactly where east is, then it's just very basic math to break up your 360-degree horizon in order to also figure out where north, south, and west are. And then you also know every single other direction along this horizon and along your compass. And so you can precisely determine exactly where you are just by positively identifying one point in the sky. And in the comments, I saw a few of you mentioning the movie Moana. And the next time that you guys watch the movie Moana, I want to encourage you to pay attention to the part where the ancestors are measuring stars in the sky, and pay attention to which star the ancestors are measuring. And you might see that it's a star that's very familiar with that Emily just talked to you about today. One final thing, just to demonstrate something that I mentioned earlier on, is that how our stars interact with our navigational compass. And I'm going to have us stay up a little bit later in the sky, and I'm going to turn on our star trails. This is like if you took a really good camera out at night and you set it on a long exposure and just left it on the sky, this is what you'd start to see. See how our stars rise in the east, across the sky, and then set in the west. And if you look very carefully on your screens, I know it's a little small there because this is better in the planetarium. You can trace how a star will rise in one house in the eastern half of the sky, and set in the same house in the western half of the sky. And we call these houses or hales because these marks on our horizon is where the stars live. And one of our navigators always likes to ask our audience, who here goes to sleep in one house and then wakes up in a different house the next morning? Does anybody do that? Well, if you do, I want to party with you. But the stars are going to be like the rest of us, that they're always going to stay within the same hales over the course of the night. I think at that, I'll just open up for some questions. I keep seeing stuff coming through on the chat, and I love questions. I love talking about some of this stuff a bit more.
Thanks, Emily and Kālepa. Those were great presentations. We have a few questions from the audience. The first one is, what was the basis for recreating the design of the sailing canoe?
Well, the canoe is, like I said, it was experiment in archaeology, but that's a traditional design, right? And so it's based upon history. It's based upon, the canoes are also archaeological evidence of where people came from. The outrigger canoe is something that you find in the Pacific. So canoes are either a single hull with an outrigger, a single hull with two outriggers, or two canoes lashed together. And basically by design, you can understand archaeological evidence indicating where people may have come from. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Nick asked, did the Polynesian people reach the Pacific coast in North, Central, or South America?
South America, most likely. Well, we speculate because the sweet potato, which is a South American cultigen, that sweet potato was brought into the Pacific and spread all across the Pacific. Today they find Polynesian chicken bones in South America, so that's archaeological evidence that indicate that very strong evidence that possible Polynesian mariners made its way to South America, found the sweet potato, and then re-exported it out into the Pacific.
Regarding the original 1975 voyage, you mentioned that the scientific mission of the voyage succeeded. Why didn't human aspects succeed?
Because we're new at it. We're very, very new at it. We had lost the whole process of socialization and learning how to live together was never addressed in the crew training process. Basically, they worked really hard to get the canoe ready to sail, and at the very last minute, they selected a few of the crew members and put them all on the canoe together and expected them to succeed. Well, human interaction, that takes training, how to learn to be a good crew member. Oh.
Emily, is that car coming from your window? Thanks.
Okay.
From Julie, you mentioned that there are known elements of the current. Is that also demonstrated on a star map or a totally separate map?
Oh, that's totally separate. The current is oceanic, but we embed the direction of the current into the circle of the horizon, which is the circle of the compass.
Do you have any worldwide voyages coming up?
Well, once the pandemic gets over, we're intending to sail the canoe around the Pacific. But I just wanted to go back to the currents. The currents in the tropics, everything comes from the eastern horizon. The stars rising, the planets, the moon, the sun. Also, the wind blows from the east, and the waves roll in from the east, and the current moves from the east to the west. So everything comes from that one horizon, except around the doldrums, the intertropical virgin zone. There, the current comes from the opposite direction. But if you understand that everything is coming from one horizon and moving across the compass and exiting on the opposite horizon, if you can internalize the motions of the environment, the stars moving above your head, the waves rolling in, the wind blowing off from one horizon, that you can also use the movement of the canoe, the motion it makes, as a general clue for direction setting.
For Emily, what is the very first class you would recommend to a beginner who wants to be an astronomer?
Oh, that is a wonderful question. I was once that person. One thing I'll say is to really get into the world of astronomy, you do need to beef up some math skills that you have. So right now, if you're a young person, I work on your math skills in whatever class that you have. And also, if you want to get getting into astronomy, there's so many wonderful books that you just grab and just read and absorb all the information that you have. But my number one recommendation for absolutely everybody out there, whether you're a future astronomer, future navigator, a future anything, the number one thing that I want you to promise me is that you will never, ever utter the following phrase. What I want you to never, ever, ever say is the words, "I'm bad at math," because it is not true. Not at all. Because math is not something that you are inherently good or bad at. It is a skill set, just like any other skill set. So right now in my life, I'm not a great artist. I just haven't practiced the skill. But if I sat down for every day and 10 minutes and I just doodled, I would eventually get better and better and better at it. And that's what math is as well. Math is something that you get to grow and you get to improve upon. And so while some people get so scared that like, oh, astronomy or physics or all this stuff, it involves math, well, that just means that you have the chance in order to grow up a skill that you might have needed to grow a little bit more. So that's my number one recommendation, and always keep learning and always just trying to absorb as much information that you can about the stars and what's intriguing you.
That's a good note. A related question, is there any software or books for future research or reference for beginning wayfinding?
Oh, there's actually, go ahead, Emily.
Well, on the topic of books, since I think I saw a question with this earlier, is there is a book about the recent Hōkūle'a mission, and I do believe Imiloa Astronomy Center has an online store now that you should be able to buy that book through our online store, and there are some other resources that you might be able to have there as well. Kālepa, do you have other recommendations?
Well, if you really want to learn about the whole tradition, including navigation and including the oceanic history, I suggest Waka Moana. Waka Moana, you can go search on Amazon. It's a pretty hefty book, but it's a complete analysis of the whole story of oceanic exploration and oceanic navigation.
I think we have time for two more. I guess this is not as much of a question, but somebody wanted Emily to go through the 28 names again.
Oh, sure. And I think I also saw a comment about a mix-up. So when maybe I misspoke, but when I was asking for the horizon, I said, what was 360 divided by 4? And that's the answer is 90. I think somebody thought I said 2, but I might have misspoken, but it's 360 divided by 4. So it's La, Aina, Noyo, Manu, Nalani, Naleo, and Haka. And if you go onto our website, ʻImiloaastronomycenter.org, there will be more information about the navigational compass. And since one thing with the Hawaiian language, especially me who's not a native speaker, it's a lot easier to absorb it when I'm able to read it. So we have resources like that on our website.
Great. And then the last one, people are still trying to figure out your riddle.
Oh, which riddle?
Which one?
I'm not sure. It just says are still trying to figure out the riddle. The house one.
Oh, the house.
The house.
Yeah.
House.
Or the one that you sleep in one house, you get up in another house.
Yes, it's a little bit better with the visual demonstration. So it's our stars, those 32 things that I put along the horizon. They're called hales or houses, and they're called houses because that's where the stars live. And as we were talking about the stars will rise in one house and then go to sleep in the same house, which is like probably most of us. But some people might go to sleep in one house and wake up in a different house. And if so, I want to party with you guys.
Great.
I love seeing all these questions come through, and I really wish that we had time to answer all of them. So I've been a little starved with answering space questions myself.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in, and a special thanks to Kālepa and Emily for joining us tonight. Next week, same time, same place, we have Night School Food for Change. We'll have guests from local projects that look to better our community through food equity, sustainability, and science. And the week after, we'll go behind the scenes of the making of Venom, our newest exhibit, which will open whenever we do.
And I would say, if you want to learn more, please go to the Imiloa Astronomy Center's website. I'll drop that in the comments after we close up here. So if you want to, find Kālepa and Emily to ask them even more questions, I think you might be able to find them through that website. So again, thank you for tuning in, and thank you for all your support during this time. We're just saying it's, hard times out there. So please consider a donation to the Academy's Relief Fund if you can. Any amount helps. The link is in the YouTube description. And yeah, hope you learned a lot. Thank you so much, Kālepa and Emily, for being here with us. Mm-hmm. Okay, good night, everybody.
Night. Thanks.
Okay.